In the following, I would like to present to you what an applicant could possibly do in a case where he files his international application outside of the priority period. So this is of course important in a case where you have a priority claim in your international application and you know that you need to file your PCT application within 12 months, but unfortunately it sometimes happens that the applicant misses this 12-month period, is one or multiple days late, and the question comes up, what can he do in such a case? Well, fortunately, there is a safeguard in the PCT procedure since 2007, which is called the restoration of the priority right. And with the help of this procedure, applicants can actually, what we say, restore the priority right, which he would otherwise lose if he's not successful in relying on this safeguard. So the request for restoration of the priority right can either be done with the receiving office under PCT Rule 26 bis.3 or with a designated office later on in the national phase under PCT Rule 49 ter. Most applicants will try it first with the receiving office, and so I will explain a little more the procedure before the receiving office. If it happens to you that you missed a priority period, you need to file a specific request to restore your priority right. This is pre-printed actually in the PCT request form, but what's not in the request form is an explanation that you need to furnish why you missed a priority period. This explanation is called a statement of reason, and that statement of reason needs to explain to the receiving office why you missed the priority period. And it needs to be drafted in a manner that shows that you either missed the priority period unintentional or in spite of due care under the given circumstances. Now, these are the two criteria which are applied by the receiving offices and possibly also later on by the designated offices. All offices need to apply the one or the other criteria. They could apply both, and some offices do apply both, but there are also many offices that only apply the one or the other standard. So you need to know what your receiving office applies and then formulate your statement accordingly. You need to submit this request within 2 months, and also your statement of reason needs to be submitted within 2 months from the end of the priority period. You might have to furnish further proof or evidence. This is subject to an invitation by the receiving office, and you might need to pay fees to request restoration of the priority right. Now, maybe just to give you a little more of an explanation what those two criteria are all about. There's unintentional, and I think that's relatively straightforward. Unintentional basically is a case where the applicant can show that he accidentally missed to file the PCT application in time. So he had all intention to file the international application within the applicable time limit, but somehow he missed it. More complicated, or what requires more of an explanation, is the due care standard. Under the due care standard, you really need to show that you did everything a careful applicant would have done or a careful agent would have done to not miss that particular time limit. And maybe just to give you a few examples of cases that we have received here at our receiving office at the International Bureau, which would explain a little better to you how we interpret the due care standard. So we've accepted due care, for instance, in a case where an applicant has taken his application to the postal authorities, has mailed his application to the receiving office, but it took exceptionally long for that application to reach the receiving office. In this case, we said this was not something the applicant could have expected, so we accepted that he acted with all due care. Or we had cases where there was a hurricane at the place where the applicant was trying to file his international application, and he was kept from filing within the time limit because of the hurricane or because of flooding in another case. Very common scenario is also where we have the situation that, for instance, a patent agent uses the services of a paralegal to help him submit the international application. This, of course, is quite acceptable. And in many instances, it's the paralegal that prepares the application for submission and then also sends the application to the receiving office. If, for instance, in a particular case, we see that the paralegal is also in charge of the docketing system and he or she has entered the filing date for the PCT into the docketing system, or maybe the filing date of the earlier application of which priority is supposed to be claimed. But she has made a mistake when entering this data. Well, this could of course then lead to a situation where the reminders generated by the docketing system do not reach the agent in time to ensure that the PCT application is filed in time. And in such a case, if the agent can show that the paralegal was well qualified and was sufficiently supervised by him or her, and that it was an exceptional human error that caused this wrong indication in the docketing system, well, in such a case, we could also consider that due care was met in such a situation. Cases where we have refused due care are, for instance, last-minute filings, where someone 5 minutes to midnight tried to fax a 60-page application to the receiving office and was all surprised that part of the application did not reach the receiving office before midnight. Well, there we think that an applicant has to start the filing, especially by fax, at an earlier stage and cannot really leave it to the last 5 minutes before the end of the priority period. Or a situation where an applicant for the first time installed a filing software on his or her computer also at the very end of the priority period and did not manage to get it to operate properly within such a short time frame, and that caused the delay in filing of the international application. Also, that was a case where we did not accept that due care was met. So what are the effects of a decision taken by the receiving office to restore the priority right on the designated office later on in the national phase? Well, in principle, if the decision was taken on the criteria of due care, all offices are supposed to follow that decision. If the decision by the receiving office, however, was taken on the unintentional criteria only offices which apply unintentional as a designated office or a lower standard are obliged to follow that decision. Offices, however, which apply as designated offices a higher standard, the due care standard, they don't need to follow the decisions based on the unintentional criteria applied by the receiving office. Also keep in mind that the receiving office's decision is not necessarily binding on the designated offices. They're entitled to review the case, and this can go either way. They can also, for instance, accept that even though the receiving office took a negative decision, they can still accept the case as a designated office. That would be quite permissible. But it could also work the other way around. Even though the receiving office accepted to restore the priority right, the designated offices, taking another look at that particular scenario, would come to a different conclusion and refuse to restore the priority claim. Now, you also need to remember that certain designated offices and also receiving offices have made what we call notifications of incompatibility. Those are certain reservations made at the time the new rule was adopted, and those offices have told us they cannot yet apply the restoration of the priority right for their purposes. So either as a receiving office or as a designated office. If you need to know to which offices this applies, which offices have made such a notification, do go to our internet site and check out. There is a table of notifications of incompatibility on our website, and there you find the information which offices currently do not yet apply the restoration procedure under the PCT. With all other offices, however, it should work, but you need to be careful that you file your request to restore the priority right within the applicable time limit of 2 months from the end of the priority period. You explain well why you missed the time limit to file your PCT application, and then hopefully you're successful with your request to restore the priority right.